Hello, everybody. Today, I wanted to do just a casual lore recap or examination of some of the NPCs in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC for Elden Ring. Specifically, we're only going to be looking at the characters who are pursuing Miquella, the group of 7 NPCs who are following the trail of Miquella as the demigod attempts to ascend to godhood. These characters include Needle Knight Leda, Sir Ansbach, Thiollier, Redmane Freyja, and Dryleaf Dane. And there are other phenomenal NPCs in the DLC, such as, of course, the already legendary Egon, who is a injured, vengeful Drake warrior who desires the death of the great dragon Baal the Dread. And Egon has become a bit of a celebrity in the community, thanks to the power of his voice acting performance. And there's other NPCs like Count Ymir, who has quite a fun storyline. But today I'm going to focus just on the, call them the Pilgrims of Miquella. Also, I think I forgot to mention the Hornsent, of course, is one of those, is in that group. So, let's get started. And I have a dog at my feet, so hopefully he stays polite and quiet. But if he doesn't, I will cut out any noises that he makes. Alright, let's start with Dryleaf Dane. Dryleaf Dane is a monk, a martial artist, and a follower of Needle Knight Leda. He is the most minor character in the troupe of NPCs. In my opinion, anyway. I think that's a fairly reasonable claim, though. So, Dryleaf Dane is how you can acquire hand-to-hand weapons in the new DLC. As he is a martial artist, each time that you defeat him, he drops a different kind of martial art for you to pick up. And so the first time that you beat him, you follow his letter, a letter that he leaves, which instructs anybody that wants to challenge him to find him and clasp their fists together. And that triggers a duel between the two of you. And at the end you get the Dryleaf Arts, a hand-to-hand combat style. And in that weapon, we learn that, here I have the description here, let's see. that this martial art combines fist strikes and kicks, the teachings of a group of spiritual seekers known as the Dryleaf sect, revealed only to those of worthy valor and character. The practice of this martial art marks the dawn of an ascetic's journey. So, these martial arts are a new weapon type added to the game, and while I have not played with them heavily myself, they seem quite fun. Now, to really understand Dryleaf Dane, we must look at the sacred seal that he carries. The Dryleaf seal, which is described as a sacred seal of the spiritual seekers known as the Dryleaf sect, enhances incantations of Miquella. Those who saw the decline of the Erd tree in the fallen leaves long ago braced themselves for the weakening of order and embraced a strict faith, and then they made to serve a new god. So, here we can learn the origins of Dryleaf Dane and his Dryleaf sect. Long ago, when the Erd tree first began to shed its leaves, a group of people recognized that... Oh, there goes the dog under my feet, off to explore the house. They predicted that this was a sign that the Golden Order of Queen Marika, the Eternal, was on a countdown, that it would not last forever. And so they instituted or created the Dryleaf sect to prepare themselves for it. And in this preparation, or the manner of this preparation, was done through asceticism and martial arts training. Now, Dryleaf Dane and his sect have settled on Miquella as the new god. And so Dryleaf Dane has followed Needle Knight Leda to the land of shadow, to follow in the footsteps of Miquella and ensure that he safely ascends to godhood. To learn a little more about Dryleaf Dane, we can read the descriptions of some of his clothes. So, the Dryleaf robe is described thusly: sun-faded and lightly soiled travel attire worn by clergymen. The gold necklace found under the breast belongs to a group of spiritual seekers known as the Dryleaf sect. This sect rejects dependence on others in all matters of faith, seeking self-discipline and self-sufficiency above all else. Now, this is interesting because I find this presents a somewhat contradictory notion. If the Dryleaf sect are devoted to self-sufficiency and self-discipline above all, and reject dependence on others, Why would they throw their lot behind Miquella, a demigod who compels with magical powers of mind control, essentially, using charms to bewitch people into acting as he sees fit? And I don't know quite how to resolve that apparent contradiction. Perhaps Dryleaf Dane sees. I don't know that if people cannot develop self-discipline themselves, then they must have discipline imposed on them externally. I don't know. But it's an interesting little snag, isn't it? We can also read the description of Dane's hat, which reads, "The sun-faded and lightly soiled hat of Dryleaf Dane. Worn low over the eyes, it obscures the wearer's vision. Meeting the gaze of another can overcome the senses, often leading to the downfall of those who would walk the noble and solitary seeker's path." So, that kind of reminds me of one of the Frenzied Flame spells. The one where you grab, maybe I can just look it up. The one where you grab another tarnished and stare into their eyes. Yeah, here it is. Inescapable frenzy. Causes the yellow flame of frenzy to blaze from the caster's eyes. And at the end of the description it says, "To gaze into one another's eyes is truly the most intimate form of human contact." So that's an interesting connection there to Dane's hat, where he wears his low hat specifically to avoid catching eye contact with another person. Alright, let's finish off Dane by reading the second hand-to-hand art that you can obtain from him, called Dane's Footwork, a technique for hand-to-hand combat without the aid of a weapon. This martial art focuses on kicking techniques. This kick-based martial art is unique to Dane, a Dryleaf and sworn ally of Leda. He acquired these skills by training with the aid of a waterfall, letting the water beat his body and throwing himself into its basin. So, that's a cool image. But let's move on now from Dryleaf Dane and discuss another member of the band of Miquella followers. Let's linger on Redmane Freyja for a moment. So, Redmane Freyja is a soldier of General Radahn, who, of course, is quite famous, being a great warrior and demigod of the Shattering, who led his armies most famously against the army of Melania. And Radahn and Melania where Melania fell into a scarlet bloom coma, and Rodon's mind was devoured by the scarlet rot. Now, Redmane Freyja had a fairly close relationship with General Rodon, as shown by her golden lion shield, which is described thusly: shield made to resemble a fierce golden lion with a luxuriant mane, awarded to especially valorous members of Rodon's personal guard on the occasion of its formation. So, it seems that Freyja was once a member of Rodon's personal guard. And she is bedecked in the warrior, in attire of a Redmane, with a golden breastplate and lion iconography on her. And we can see by examining her helm that there is a scar in the metal that lands right between the eyes. And when we read the description of the helm, we can understand why that's there. Golden helm of Redmane Freyja, member of General Rodon's most distinguished knights. A hideous scarlet wound was once hewn into the center of her face. Later, Miquella gently put his lips to it, and the unfading scar became the compass that Freyja would thereafter follow. So now we can begin to see a little of Freyja's story take shape. She was once a great knight of General Rodon, but when the scarlet rot arrived and her general squared off with the blade of Miquella, Freyja was injured by the scarlet rot. Or, this is speculation, perhaps this took place at a different time. All we know for sure is that Freyja succumbed to a scarlet rot wound. And then Miquella cured her. And after General Rodon fell, well, actually, thinking about it, perhaps it was in that moment that Miquella charmed her. For the fact of all of these NPCs is that they have all been charmed by Miquella, taken under his spell, and they are all essentially forced to serve him. So perhaps when Miquella kissed Freyja's wound, he also placed his magical charm upon her, so that she would serve him. And eventually she made her way to the land of shadow to follow after him. Now to get a bit more of Freyja's history, before we discuss the events of the DLC, we can read the description of her armor, which reads, Golden armor of Redmane Freyja, member of General Rodon's most distinguished knights, affixed with a black woolen mantle. After witnessing Freyja's valor as a gladiator in his youth, Rodon invited her to join the ranks of his most trusted warriors. So that's interesting. And suggests that Freyja likely fought in the Colosseums. The Colosseums that we can find throughout the lands between. Now, one way or another, Freyja wound up in the Land of Shadow, following after Miquella. But once the charm broke over this band of followers, which happens partway through the DLC, she was freed from her compulsion to follow the footsteps of Miquella, and she instead turned her attention to a vow that had been made between her general and Miquella. She wanted to ascertain the nature of this vow, and so she traveled to the Shadow Keep, the fortress of Mesmer the Impaler, and delved into the tablets of the storehouse, attempting to learn the nature of the vow. It's only with the assistance of Sir Ansbach that Freyja learns that Miquella intends to revive General Radahn. Freyja is pleased with this outcome, believing that there is no better fate for her beloved general than for him to return and carry out war eternally. Satisfied with this plan of Miquella's, Freyja remains loyal to the would-be god, and eventually stands alongside Dryleaf Dane and Needle Knight Leda in the final battle between these erstwhile companions. Alright, let's move on now to Moor, Sweet Moor. So, when we find Moor, he is acting as a merchant for us, and he discusses the forager brood and says that the forager brood collects things which he then gives to his allies, Needle Knight Leda and the other pilgrims who work for Miquella the Kind. Now, the forager brood, you come to discover, are kindred of rot, those bug-like centipede creatures who are found in places where the scarlet rot has taken root. But the forager brood are not hostile to us, as most of those kindred are. Rather, they are friendly and helpful, and they give us supplies and cookbooks, recipes for pickling various meats. Sipping on some coffee here. Now, Moor is decked out in verdigris armor, and this is quite an interesting substance in the world of Elden Ring. And I won't pretend to have a full understanding of Moor's lore, because I think the verdigris armor that he wears hints at some more depth that I'm not sure the community completely understands yet. So, first off, I will read the description of the verdigris discus talisman. A discus made of verdigris, the corroded metal known for its heft, raises defense with higher equipment load. Great weight makes for great strength, the strength to protect others. So, we know a little bit about verdigris here, that there might be this sort of association with protection or defending other people. Now let's read the description of Moor's helm. Helm made from an unusual metal known as verdigris. Verdigris is said to be the gift of an outer god. Possessed of an enormously hefty yet supple strength, thanks to its rusted nature. So that is quite interesting, isn't it? That verdigris is the gift of an outer god. Now what I suspect is that based on the association of Moor with the forager brood, I suspect that the outer god referenced here is the god of the scarlet rot, because verdigris is oxidized copper, and oxidization is this. You could consider it like the rotting of metal in a way. If the outer god of rot is about sort of the degradation of things, then you could see how verdigris might be associated with that. So that would be my guess of the outer god referenced here. And then the question is, how exactly did Moor gain this association with rot and with verdigris? And that I don't know. That to me is a mystery. But as for Moor, he is a kindly, friendly fellow. And he sells you things, as I said. But once you break, or once the charm of Miquella breaks, Moor becomes rather depressed. And he asks you, what should he do? He says that his mother abandoned his brood, that his mother didn't love him, and his siblings. And he asks what to do. And you can respond that you should put it behind you, in which case Moor says, okay, maybe that's what Miquella is here for, to provide love to the unloved. Or you can tell Moor to be sad forever, in which case Moor sinks into a deep depression, and you eventually find him dead, curled up with one of the forager brood. Now, this is speculation on my part, but I think the forager brood, when Moore is talking about, our mother abandoned her brood, I think he's talking about the forager brood. And the mother is probably the goddess of rot. It's interesting, for example, that the kindred of rot in the DLC are red, except for the forager brood, who are their normal skin tone. So maybe that shows them to be somewhat excluded from the family of rot, I suppose. So I don't know for sure, but it seems something along those lines, that Moore somehow ended up with this forager brood, and the brood was excised from the goddess of rot that they worshipped for whatever reason. So, if you tell Moore to put it behind him, put his sadness behind him, he gives his loyalty to Miquella fully, for the sake of love and being loved. And he will stand against you at the end of the DLC as you are trying to reach Miquella. Next up, let's talk about Thiollier. Thiollier is a rather sad fellow. He is a master of poisons and crafts and utilizes poisons. He is also an adherent of Saint Trina and adores her velvety sleep. At first, when you meet him, he is, beats up on himself a bit, says he's not very useful, but he can sell poisons. And it's only when the great rune breaks that he reveals his old self, saying that he's haunted by memories of Saint Trina, the patron of sleep. He decides that he must seek out Saint Trina. And so he ventures down to a great fissure of coffins and descends down to the bottom, where he finds Saint Trina herself, blooming in a purple grove. Once you reach him down there, he is, of course, as usual, depressed that he cannot hear Saint Trina's voice. And then you come along and you drink Saint Trina's nectar, and you hear her voice speaking to you. And she tells you that Miquella must die for his own sake, that godhood would be a prison for him. And you try to tell Thiollier this, but Thiollier is adamant that only he can hear the words of Saint Trina, and that you must be lying to him, playing a cruel trick on him. And he becomes so irate, in fact, that he attacks you. And you put him down. And as he's beaten and lying on the ground, you tell him again what Saint Trina said. And he begins to consider the fact that you might be telling the truth. And you leave him there. And eventually he reappears in the final battle with all of the followers of Miquella. And he stands alongside you as an adherent of Saint Trina, hoping to carry out her desire that Miquella be killed. So Thiollier fights against Needle Knight Leda and her allies. And that's about the long and short of it for Thiollier. We can read a couple of his items before we move on. So first, his weapon, his hidden needle. Concealed weapon used by Thiollier, of a design generally favored by poison wielders for dark and subtle purposes. Like Saint Trina, who blossomed in the deep purple garden, a rich poison is secreted from within, which sends its victims into an eternal sleep. And this is the description of his mask. A mask upon which is carved a tranquil, sleeping face. The silver hair is arranged in the same style as Saint Trina's, increasing arcane. Just once, Thiollier was granted the sweet repose of velvety sleep. The remainder of his days would be spent attempting to recapture it. That's quite appropriate for an ASMR video, isn't it? Somebody could do a great ASMR roleplay of Saint Trina if they were very good at cosplay, because that would require a lot of makeup and props to pull off properly. Let's read the description of Thiollier's garb. The dark attire of those who wield poison in secret. The silver hair is arranged in the same style as Saint Trina's, increasing arcane. Additionally, countless needles are sewn onto the exterior, apparently for talismanic effect. So, that is or Thiollier for you. And just to talk about him a little bit more, I loved Thiollier. He was so pathetic and sad at the beginning, but by the end he had become brave. And unfortunately he's still kind of useless in a fight because he just uses poison and it's not very good. But, you know, he's another body to draw aggro, right? So he served his purpose. But narratively, I was very proud of him. He grew quite a lot over the course of the DLC. So, next, let's do the Hornsent. And these last three are somewhat more tied together. Hornsent, Needle Knight Leda, and Sir Ansbach. Let's do the Hornsent first. So, the Hornsent, we don't know his name. He's just the Hornsent to us. And naturally, of course, as a Hornsent, he is a native of the Land of Shadow. And he hates Mesmer the Impaler. He hates Queen Merica. He hates the Erd Tree. All of which are emblems of the crusade that killed his people, destroyed his people entirely. And specifically, killed his family, as the Hornsent can reference his mother, his wife, and his child that he has failed. And so he is motivated entirely by revenge. And he's a cool character. And there's a bit of backstory you can learn about him, specifically by looking at his mask, his caterpillar mask. Because, I'll read the description of the caterpillar mask so you can understand what it tells us. Grotesque mask constructed from countless solidified caterpillars, a ritual implement of the greater potentates of Bonny Village, used to ward off thoughts of impurity, doubt, temptation, and other wickednesses one is vulnerable to while absorbed in divine ritual. Now, just in case you don't know the lore of the Bonny Village and the potentates there, I will share it with you now. It is very, very grisly. The potentates of Bonny Village, of which this Hornsent was one, would whip shamans from a certain village, would whip them with poisoned, rotting whips of teeth that would cause infected wounds on the shamans. And once they were thoroughly agonized, the potentates would take large cleavers, chop them up, and stuff them into pots. And this was a religious ritual for the Hornsent. Now, the caterpillar mask tells us that the Hornsent NPC was once an enactor of such cruelty. So, before you go feeling too much sympathy for his suffering, just ponder the horrors that he committed on others. But his vengeance is his motivating force, and we can learn a little bit more about that with his braided cord robe that he wears, the description of which says, "Ragged black cloth overlaid with braided cord, attire of a vengeance-seeking Hornsent. The braided cord ties together the vow of the revenger with the victim's grudges. It must never come undone. Enhances both watchful spirits and the vengeful spirits summoned by horned bairns." So, the Hornsent has entirely devoted himself to his revenge. And his revenge is specifically directed at Mesmer the Impaler. That is his first target. And you can summon him for the fight against Mesmer. And if you do not, the Hornsent sinks into depression. Surprise, surprise, a depressed NPC in a FromSoft game, I know. Spare me such innovation. But he's very depressed that he failed to get his revenge, and he slinks off to join Leda in protecting Miquella the Kind. If you do help him get his revenge, he is unsatisfied and is intent on continuing to kill the children of America. eventually, he turns his blade on you, for you are a tarnished, and thus a representative of America's Golden Order, and you have to cut him down. So, the Hornsent is a cool NPC. I quite liked him. I liked his dialogue. In my playthrough, I assumed I could summon him for the Mesmer fight given the dialogue that he had. But I never saw the summoning sign. Turns out that it's actually in the boss arena, and I just never saw it there. So, in my playthrough, he was on the side of Leda in the final battle. But his dialogue is quite enjoyable. Who doesn't love a good story of, a person consumed by vengeance? It's a tale as old as time. It never gets old. But what makes him a very interesting character is the sort of conflict, I suppose, between his loyalty to Miquella. Well, loyalty maybe isn't the right word. The fact that he's working for Miquella, and the fact that Miquella is the son of the woman who destroyed the Hornsent's entire culture, his home, his world. Alright. My dog just barked, despite the fact that I politely asked him not to do that. And then I did a couple other chores, so I don't remember exactly where I was. I think I was talking about the Hornsent. And, I know I was talking about the Hornsent. I think I was talking about his, why he's an interesting character. Yeah, there's just a lot of, conflict in his conception. He was this horrible monster to America and her people, and then he had a horrible crime done to him in response, and now he is trying to deliver vengeance in turn. He is basically the cycle of brutal vengeance distilled into a single character. It's just revenge after revenge in his storyline. Which, by the way, I see some people online who sort of say, the Hornsent deserved it. America did nothing wrong, so on and so on. Which I get people are, they're mostly joking. It's a video game world, so it's not like it really has actual weight. But I just wanted to plant my flag that I don't quite agree with that. Just remember that the Hornsent were about as evil to their own people as they were to America's. There were many, many Hornsent who had horrific crimes done to them as a matter of course. The Hornsent were being chopped up and stuffed into pots alongside the shamans. The Hornsent were being tortured by the Inquisition. The Inquisition famous for being torturous. That's like the primary characterization that the Inquisition is given, is that they committed torture. And, of course, course, they were doing that to their own Hornsent people. The Flyman affliction. I don't really think this is true necessarily, but I have seen people saying that the Hornsent were infecting their own people with the fly virus. I wouldn't stand by that claim. I don't see any evidence of that. But if it's true, then, it's even worse, right? So, the Hornsent who were committing the atrocities deserved what they got, but the Crusade destroyed, innocent and guilty alike. There was no distinction made between, those Hornsent who were just being tortured as much as America's people were. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to Sir Ansbach. Sir Ansbach is one of my favorite NPCs in the DLC. He is a servant of Mohg, or he was a pure-blood knight of Mohg. And then he tried to attack Miquella to break the charm over his master, and Miquella charmed him instead. And so Sir Ansbach fell under the influence of Miquella and became a servant, following in his footsteps. Let's read a couple of Ansbach's items, starting with the Wise Man's Mask. The iron mask of Sir Ansbach, giving the appearance of a quiet, wise, old bearded man. But an old fear lurks beneath, together with the cold, unflinching discipline that once honed his blade, now employed to enhance blood oath and dynastic skills. Then we can read the description of Ansbach's attire. Attire of Sir Ansbach. The embroidered crest of the pure-blood knights has now all but faded away. Slightly enhances blood oath and dynastic skills. Ansbach understood that keeping his oath to his old master was not an act of logic, nor would it bear any justice, but it was for these very reasons he was unable to let go. And then Ansbach also has a weapon, two weapons in fact. His longbow. A longbow consisting of 2 bow bodies and 2 strings. Unusually for a longbow, it can be wielded similarly to a light bow, provided that the wielder has the extraordinary dexterity demanded. And this extraordinary dexterity is 43 dexterity. And then Ansbach also has a melee weapon, the Obsidian Lamina, signature weapon of the pure-blood knight Ansbach. A viciously keen and slender scythe made for combat. The obsidian edge relies not upon trickery to fulfill its violent purpose. Through skill alone, the wielder can rip and rend through foes, sowing blossoms of red upon the battlefield. So, Most of the lore of Ansbach we get through dialogue with him. And there's a lot of conversations you can have with Sir Ansbach, so I'm going to be summarizing this quite heavily. But when you first meet Ansbach, he asks you to find more crosses of Miquella and report back to him about them, explaining that he wants to discern Miquella's intentions, and he hopes that the crosses can give him clues. So, you wander around and you find more of these crosses, and you return to Ansbach and report back. And Ansbach sort of makes inferences from these facts, assuming certain things like that Miquella has abandoned Saint Trina, his other half, or that Miquella intends to enter the Tower of Enir Ilim. That he has abandoned his birthright as the daughter of America, as an Empyrean. And eventually, the great rune of Miquella is shattered, and the charm over the Seekers of Miquella breaks. And then Ansbach begins to sing a very different tune. When you go and speak to him, he tells you that now that clarity has been restored to him, he remembers exactly his true feelings on Miquella. He once tried to challenge Miquella in the hopes of freeing Moog from the Empyrean's enchantment. But Miquella artfully stole his will. And that was when Ansbach fell into the service of Miquella. However, now with his faculties restored, Ansbach asserts that Miquella the Kind is a monster who would use terrifying powers of mind control, essentially, but calling it love. Ansbach is terrified of Miquella, and his instincts tell him to run away. But he stays instead and travels to the Shadowkeep, where he finds himself in the storehouse investigating the plans of Miquella. Particularly a disturbing fact that Lord Moog's body had been stolen after Moog was killed. And Ansbach wants to find out exactly what is happening to his lord's body. For Ansbach is still loyal to Moog and wants to prevent any humiliation or disrespect done to the Lord of Blood. So you find a scroll in the storehouse and bring it to Ansbach. And the scroll reveals Miquella's plan, that he is going to use the corpse of Moog as a vessel for the soul of his king consort, Radahn. This is intolerable to Ansbach, and he decides that he is going to do what he can to stop Miquella. At this time, he also gives you a letter for Freyja that tells her of Miquella's intentions for Radahn. Now, I don't know exactly why he does this, but it seems that he has a sort of respect for Freyja, and even though this letter will drive Freyja into a conflict that will end with her fighting him, Ansbach, he does it anyway. And I think it's out of his nobility and honor that he does this, even though it could spell his own doom, that it's giving an ally to his enemies. So once this is done, you eventually reach the final battle with all the NPCs, and Ansbach joins your side, fighting against Needle Knight Leda and her allies. And then, of course, just like Thiollier, you can bring Ansbach into the final boss of the DLC. And if Ansbach dies there, he urges your character to become a lord, not for gods, but for men. So, that's about it for Ansbach. If you hear all of his dialogue, you'll get a sense of his character and why he's kind of charming. His honor and his wisdom and his humanity, his fear of Miquella, but also his loyalty to his lord. He's a great character. I also love that if you get him and Thiollier on the same side, afterwards Ansbach remarks on Thiolier's bravery, calling him Sir Thiollier, I think, saying that he acquitted himself well. So that's a nice moment. So now, finally, we come to Needle Knight Leda, the character around whom all these other characters kind of rotate. She's the leader of their band. So Needle Knight Leda is a knight of Miquella, one of the Needle Knights. And the Needle Knights are described in a similar manner to how the needle, the unalloyed gold needle, Miquella's needle, is described. Which is interesting, and I'm sure intentional, because Miquella's needle is described as being a tool to ward away the influence and the meddling of outer gods. And the armor of Leda is described like this. Chest armor of Needle Knight Leda, embroidered with a golden crossed tree motif. The chalk-white cloak and surcoat symbolize the honor of the Needle Knights. Kindly Miquella fashioned us as his needles, to quell all, to ward away all. So, in the same way that the needles that Miquella created warded away the influence of outer gods, it seems he kept a coterie of knights who warded away more physical threats. Now, there's Leda is a wonderful character, and just a total psychopath. But you kind of come to realize that over the course of the DLC. She makes references to, the crusted blood that hangs around her, or something like that. And her sword, when you eventually get it, kind of reveals her dark origins. And so this is the description of her sword. Light great sword with gold inlaid, weapon of Leda, the Needle Knight. Though polished to a mirror sheen, this blade still reeks with the stench of crusted blood that lingers from the cull of her knightly comrades. So, okay, I didn't do a good job at setting this up. If I were narrating this dramatically, this should have been the final revelation, right? But let's work backwards, or chronologically, I guess. So this blade tells us that Leda once killed all of her Needle Knight fellows, that she is the last of her kind, of her order. And, if I go find the talismans, let's see if I can pull these up real quick. What is it? Crossed tree talisman, I think. Lacerating crossed tree. Yeah, here's one. And then the retaliatory cross tree. I think these are the two I'm looking for. Yeah, here we go. Alright, so, yeah, these both have the same information. So, here's the lacerating crossed tree talisman. Handicraft depicting a golden crossed tree. One of the items conferred to the Needle Knights. Long ago, the Needle Knights were in service of Miquella, but now they are no more, save for one. And so this is, of course, another bit of evidence around the fact that Leda murdered all of her fellows. She is the last Needle Knight left. And why did she do it? Well, we kind of find out a very likely reason in the DLC when the charm of Miquella breaks. Because as soon as there is no magical compulsion keeping the group together, Needle Knight Leda just turns on everybody and starts killing. So first she turns her attention to the Hornsent, believing that he is going to betray Miquella. And you have the option to help her kill the Hornsent, or defend the Hornsent from her attack. And after you deal with the Hornsent, you can then help her kill Ansbach as well, or defend him from her attack. So, it seems that when left to her own devices, Leda sort of goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and starts killing her own allies. Paranoid that they are going to turn against her beloved Miquella. What's interesting is there's a reference to the Black Knights. Oh, am I going to be able to find this quickly? Yes, here it is. The Black Knight helm. And the Black Knights were the soldiers of Mesmer. And this is the description of their helmet. helm worn by the Black Knights, servants of Mesmer the Impaler. Black iron ornamented with gold. A rotten odor stubbornly clings to it. Perhaps it arises from the tainted nature of the blood that splattered upon it. Or perhaps it is the wearer's own blackened soul, festering after endless slaughter. So, compare that to Leda's sword, which says that though the blade is polished to a mirror sheen, it still reeks with the stench of crusted blood. So I like this idea that these people, whether the Black Knights or Leda, they have just committed so much merciless slaughter that the crimes of their bloodthirsty acts manifests around them like a stink, like the rotten stench of blood. So Needle Knight Leda is a pretty cool character as well. Did I really go through her story? I mean, she's the one that you meet before you even enter the realm of shadow. And she tells you to touch the withered arm to go there. And then you meet her once before the Great Rune breaks. And then once the Great Rune breaks, she's mostly just slaughtering your friends left and right, so that takes up most of the time. You know, what's kind of funny now that I think about it is you can tell her that Thiollier might betray Miquella, and she doesn't believe it. But then she goes after the Hornsent instead, even though there's no way to get him on your side in the fight. So she won't go after Thiollier, who you can get as an ally trying to kill Miquella, but she will go after the Hornsent. So her suspicions just kind of leading her astray there. Yeah, once you deal with the Hornsent and Ansbach bits, you eventually find Leda at the end of the game. She is leading the force to, keep you away from Miquella. So you have this final battle with her and all the other NPCs. I'll read to you Leda's rune. Blessing of Needle Knight Leda, an unalloyed light that has never dwelled in an eye. Miquella gifted Leda with gentle gold to bring a soft hue to her faded eyes. So, kind of interesting, isn't it? An unalloyed light that has never dwelled in an eye. I wonder what the significance of that is. But anyway, she is completely loyal to Miquella, fanatically devoted to him. But, yeah, that's about it. Those NPCs, or the main cast of characters that you interact with throughout the DLC. And for me, it was one of the most enjoyable parts of the DLC, interacting with these characters, playing through their storylines, and then eventually meeting them in the final battle, where this awesome music and they're all talking to each other, and it's just phenomenal. It landed so perfectly with me. I loved that fight, and I really think the more distance that I get from this DLC, the more that this kind of NPC storyline is going to be the height of the game for me. Honestly, the final boss fell flat for me, which, it is what it is. But I think narratively, even Miquella was, he's just kind of this abstract goal off in the distance. But the whole time you're interacting with these NPCs instead, getting to know them, gaining investment in their characters and their storylines. And then it all builds to this big fight between all the people that you've been working with. So, that to me was really where the narrative arc was in the DLC. I feel like Miquella could have been utilized a bit more, to give him more weight. For instance, we could have met him once when the charm was still active. And, we wouldn't have been able to hurt him because we were still under the effects of the charm. Although, now that I think about it, I'm not sure we actually were charmed. I think narratively, at one point, Leda says, you haven't changed your actions at all, even though the charm's broken, almost as though you weren't charmed in the first place. So, I always kind of assumed that I was under a charm of Miquella, but I guess maybe we weren't. Regardless, it would have been a good conceit to have an early meeting with Miquella if he just charms you and you can't hurt him. I also think it's weird that Miquella supposedly walked through every corner of this land, and yet no characters you meet have had any interactions with him. You don't walk into Shadowkeep and Mesmer isn't oh hey, my little brother just came through here. That was weird. I haven't seen my family in a long time. Right? I just feel like there could have been, Miquella didn't have any effect on the world. We were just following his storyline from a distance. But it didn't really have any real world weight to it. So, I think in the end, for me personally, his storyline was okay. I don't have any problems with him wanting to become a god and renouncing his heritage and blah blah blah. I think that all works totally perfectly well. It's all interesting enough. I just think that it could have been pulled off a bit better if we had had a bit more, just felt Miquella's presence a bit more directly. But, yeah, that's just my opinion. Because I think just compared to how invested I was in the NPCs, going from the NPC fight to the final battle with Miquella, just felt like, well, I don't really care about this. All the stuff I cared about was wrapped up in a bow with the NPCs. But yeah, I don't want to say the Miquella storyline was bad or anything. I felt like it could have been elevated a bit more. Anyway, this has kind of turned into an impromptu narrative critique, which I